F1 22 sees a huge change in car performance, and as a result, setups and driving. The new downforce regulations this year, combined with other new factors with the cars, mean we racers need to be creative when choosing our braking points and racing lines, even on tracks we all know well. These new cars are tricky to understand, therefore we here at RacingGames drafted in some help in the form of Nathan Tague, team manager of Oracle Red Bull Racing Esports and head of sim racing at G2 Esports, for how to set up the car to get the optimal performance. I'm Mark from RacingGames, and today I'm here to merely relay the advice of a true sim racing pro. Before we start, let's quickly go over some expectations. In the words of Nathan, no setup is going to be the magic bullet to insane time gains. It might dial out some of the understeer F1 games are known for, or give you a little more top speed, but for the most part, developing driving fundamentals is the first stop for improvement. So we might not have the perfect fit for your current driving style, but we can certainly help lay the foundations for eventual success. Alright, now let's get stuck into it. This might sound surprising, but the default setups are actually a really good place to start when first driving a track. As Nathan puts it, when first attacking a circuit, the default setups are actually a very good way of understanding the general direction in which to take the setup. Basic presets aren't going to set the world on fire, but they will provide you with a really solid base from which to work from. For Silverstone, you're going to want less wing and superior balance through long fast corners, so try using the lower wing presets initially to understand how they affect the car and build from there. For a circuit like Monaco, you'll want the complete opposite. Start with the higher wing presets and then turn your attention to dialing in some mechanical grip through suspension and ride height tweaks. Once you've got to grips with these setups, you can then have a better idea of where to adjust in order to gain in your lap times. If you have poor stability at high speeds, or even high speed oversteer, Nathan advises to incrementally decrease the rear camber to dial it out. Struggling in traction zones can be fixed by softening the rear suspension or tweaking the rear tyre pressures. Low speed understeer will require you to look more at mechanical grip, these being tyre pressures, suspension settings, camber and toe, whereas high speed understeer will most likely be better dialed out by wing settings. So Nathan states, balance is important, as oftentimes outright performance over one lap translates into more tyre degradation over a stint, which makes an interesting point for this next section. Before we move on, have you subscribed to RacingGames yet? Just one click and you're on the RacingGames grid. Oh, and hit that notification bell too so you never miss an upload. Alright, on with the video. When building a setup, it's crucial to know just what that setup will be used for. As Nathan puts it, don't be lured into seeing esports pros at the top of the time trial leaderboards and then downloading their setups to use in longer races. Those setups are designed to be driven on the absolute limit for one lap, and over the course of a long race are a recipe for disaster due to their unstable nature and unpredictability, as well as other drawbacks such as increased tyre degradation. Too many beginners fall into the trap of not understanding Parc Fermé rules, meaning they enter a race with a setup designed more for a one-lap blast rather than a 50% race distance. As you can imagine, this won't end well for them, so it's key to tailor the setup for the scenario you'll most likely use it for. Nathan's advice is to start with an end goal and test the setup accordingly. For longer races, look at more than just the time delta. Focus on how the balance changes over a stint and how the tyres last over a run. Test multiple tyre compounds, as any setup changes you make might be good on more responsive rubber, but might not necessarily work on a longer, medium or hard stint. Test dirty air and how the car responds. Adding some front wing can help if you know you're going to be stuck in a train. Your DRS and ERS usage and how that affects fuel usage, all of these things will affect the car in race trim. There is definitely a lot to unpack here, but we haven't even got to what happens in a wet to dry or dry to wet scenario. Nathan's recommendation is to check the weather forecast before every race weekend, as if qualifying and the race are under different conditions, it might make more sense to sacrifice qualifying performance in order to set the car up for the race. For wet conditions, Nathan's guide is to focus initially on ride height, bottoming out in the wet is destination barriers. while softening up the entire car and lowering the tyre pressures for a better contact patch with the tarmac. Wings are also important. The last thing you want in a downpour are skinny wings, so increase those too. The biggest change to the cars this year is in their aerodynamics. Ground effect is back in F1, and therefore there is far less visible aero, especially on the barge boards and front wing areas of the car. As Nathan has observed, what you will find this year is that cars at lower speeds will be slower with more understeer, whereas in the higher speed corners of circuits like Jeddah and Silverstone, the car will feel more responsive. So how does this affect the car setup? To make the most of the ground effect, you'll want to experiment with rake and ride heights to suit the needs of the circuit you're setting up for. However, it's all about compromise. Running the setup too low will result in bottoming out, a real issue at historic circuits like Mexico and Monza, whereas at the newer, smoother circuits you can be more aggressive with ride height to maximise gains. Thankfully, we don't need to worry about porpoising, so we can afford to be more aggressive, at least until porpoising is patched in at a later date. Something else to factor in when considering the aerodynamics is that this year, in addition to the new fundamentals introduced by ground effect, the in-game setups have been opened up considerably, with more fine-tuning of certain settings. Nathan puts it best by saying, "This gives a huge window of opportunity. Don't be afraid to experiment with things you wouldn't have considered in previous F1 titles. Negative rake, reverse wings, and suspensions. Try and see how it affects the car in all situations." This kind of thinking will be crucial early on as the meta is far less settled and predictable. This gives us license to play around and see what works, something that we have definitely used to good effect in our setup guides, so do check those out. Before I end the video, there is one final aspect to consider when creating a car setup, and that's the in-car options available. At the end of the day, a setup only goes so far in helping achieve better lap times, and ultimately it all comes down to the driver. So far we've looked at external factors affecting the setup, such as the track, weather and aerodynamics, but braking and throttling also play a big part in getting the car around a circuit. Locking up the brakes can cost valuable time, and spinning on corner exit is arguably the most frustrating thing any racer has experienced. Here's what Nathan has to say about braking and accelerating. Brake pressure has on the whole been 100% pressure and 50% bias as the meta, but again, with a new game this could reasonably change. Be careful with these settings, especially if you don't use a load cell pedal, as these require fine control on the brake pedal to avoid lockups. Trail braking in any race title is a crucial skill for lap time, as it helps rotate the car whilst maximising braking performance. If you're feeling particularly adventurous, you can adjust the brake bias depending on the corner. However, this seems to have less effect in F1 games than it would in other titles. When it comes to differential, I expect lower off-throttle values of 50 to 60% to be preferred to counter the understeer provided by the new regulations, with on-throttle run pretty high as 100%, to maximise stability on exits due to the smaller amount of downforce generated by the rear wing this year. Hopefully all of this advice is useful to you, but do comment below letting us know how you get on with your setups and any other tips and tricks that we've missed out. Also, a huge thanks from us at RacingGames to Nathan Tague for helping us out with this video. Thanks for watching. I've been Mark from RacingGames. Please like and subscribe for all things F1 22, and now I'm off to tweak my Monaco setup for the 183rd time. Maybe this time I'll get through the tunnel without crashing. I mean, we can only hope.